Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the South Valley Community Meeting for the City of Los Angeles Assessment of Fair Housing. Please note that we'll be recording the meeting this evening and possibly sharing the recording on the city's website. We're excited to have you with us tonight, but before we dive in, we have a few housekeeping items to start with. First, we have Spanish interpretation available. Everyone will need to select the language they'd like to hear the meeting in, and you can do that by clicking on the interpretation button on the lower part of your screen and choosing between English and Spanish. We also have a sign language interpreter, and you can choose to see the ASL interpretation using that same interpretation button on the bottom of your screen. Additionally, the meeting will be closed captioned, and anyone wishing to view captions can click on the link in the chat, which will take you to the stream text site with the captions. So I'll pause for people to select those options, and I think we wanted to hear that in Spanish as well.
Hola y bienvenidos también a la reunión que se llevará a cabo hoy. Si desea escuchar el programa interpretado al español, favor de oprimir el icono de globo que aparecerá en la parte inferior de su dispositivo. Si desea escuchar solo en español, oprima silenciar audio original o mute original audio. También habrá la oportunidad de poder ver los subtítulos y para poder mirar los subtítulos también puede oprimir el enlace que se encontrará en la sección de charla. Gracias.
Okay, thank you so much. So when you're speaking tonight, we do ask that you talk slowly so that our interpreters are able to capture what you're saying. A couple other notes about how we'll use Zoom. When we have opportunities for questions or discussions, you can use the raise hand button to signal that you would like to speak. Just click on reactions at the bottom of the screen and choose the raise hand options. You can control your audio and video using the mute and start video buttons. We just ask that you stay muted during the presentation just to limit background noise. You can also share questions or ideas throughout the meeting using the chat feature. And we'll try to answer your questions during the meeting, but if we're not able to answer you tonight, someone will be in touch with you by email afterward. And finally, if you're joining us by phone, please use *6 to mute or unmute your sound and *9 to raise your hand. And I'll mention these again before we begin our discussion.
Hello, good evening. Nancy Twum Aquaboa. I'm with the Los Angeles Housing Department, also known as LAHD. This project, an assessment of fair housing, or AFH, will analyze the fair housing landscape in the city of Los Angeles, essentially looking at whether all residents are able to access housing that is suitable for them, free from unlawful discrimination. It will also look at whether the areas where people live impact their ability to access different community resources and opportunities. These types of studies are required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for any city or county that receives HUD grants for community development or affordable housing. Additionally, as of 2018, the state of California also requires public agencies, including cities, counties, and housing authorities, to prepare fair housing assessments. The City of Los Angeles Housing Department will be leading the development of this study in partnership with the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, or HACLA. In addition to myself, we also have other staff from LAHD represented here. So I'll turn it over to staff to introduce themselves from the department.
Hi, everyone. Joel Montano, also with the Los Angeles Housing Department. Good to be here with you all tonight. And I'll pass it to Marisol.
Thank you, Joel. Good evening, everybody. Marisol Romero, also with the Los Angeles Housing Department. I'll pass it over to Maya.
The Housing Department, pass it to Stephanie.
Good evening, folks. I'm Stephanie Garcia, student professional worker with LHD. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And we also have staff from HACLA. So please go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hi, this is Patricia Mendoza with HACLA.
Great. And then LHD and HACLA are working with Mosaic Community Planning, a consultant firm, to assist us in the research and development of the city study. Members of Mosaic's team are here, so I'll turn it over to Mosaic to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Jessica Fish with Mosaic Community Planning.
And I'm Melissa Mayu, also with Mosaic.
I am Madison Hughes. I'm also with Mosaic.
Great. So once we get to our discussion, you'll see some of these folks facilitate in smaller breakout groups. If you would like to contact any of the team about the AFH, you can email lahd.afhpolicy@lacity.org. This email address will be placed in the chat box for reference. You can also send a message there if you have additional input after tonight or would like to be added to an email list for updates about this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. One of the most important aspects of the AFH is hearing from local residents and other stakeholders about the needs you see related to fair housing and access to opportunity in LA. Having an on-the-ground perspective for many people living and working in the city every day is really crucial. We'll begin tonight with an overview of fair housing and the AFH process, so everyone has an understanding of the topics we'll be talking about, but most of the meeting time will be a chance for us to hear from you. Your input will help identify priority fair housing issues and their causes. It will also shape the goals and strategies the city and HACLA leaders adopt. So it's very important that we hear your perspectives, and we'll talk also about ways you can stay involved with the project at the end of the meeting. But now I'll begin with an overview of fair housing. Generally, when we talk about fair housing, we're talking about everyone's right to participate in the housing market, to own, sell, purchase, or rent housing of their choice without fear of unlawful discrimination. That includes things like renting or buying a home, obtaining homeowners or renters insurance, having access to housing loans, and having fair property appraisals. A variety of laws uphold our fair housing rights, beginning with the Fair Housing Rights Act of 1968, which was the first nationwide fair housing protection. Under the Federal Fair Housing Act, everyone is protected from housing discrimination based on race or ethnicity, color, religion, national origin, sex, family status, and disability. We refer to these as protected classes because people are protected from housing discrimination based on these characteristics or classes. Along with the Fair Housing Act, many states have additional protections. The state of California has a series of laws that expanded fair housing protections to include several more protected classes, which you see listed here. They include marital status, age, ancestry, immigration status, language, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, genetic information, veteran or military status, occupation, and other arbitrary factors. The state also protects people from discrimination based on their source of income, which includes the use of Section 8 housing choice vouchers or other similar types of housing assistance. So as you can see, you have considerable additional fair housing protection under California laws. Here we have a few examples of actions that would be considered illegal discrimination if they're based on protected class. Examples include telling someone that a house is not available for rent or sale when it really is, or denying mortgage loan applications based on protected class. Landlords or lenders cannot apply different terms to a lease or loan based on protected characteristics. So for example, a landlord could not charge a higher security deposit or higher rent to a family with children than to a household without kids. A property manager also couldn't steer families with children to one part of an apartment development, and real estate agents cannot steer home buyers or limit showings to certain neighborhoods based on protected class. Refusing to make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities and refusing to accept Section 8 housing choice vouchers are also examples of discrimination because disability and source of income are protected by law. Additionally, housing advertisements should not be discriminatory, and the Department of Justice recently settled a case with Facebook that alleged it was using protected characteristics such as race or gender in determining how to target ads for housing. So while this is not a complete list of ways housing discrimination is present, it illustrates some of the ways it may happen beyond refusing to rent or sell housing to someone. Under the Obama administration, HUD adopted a new fair housing rule called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, or AFFH, that called on cities and counties to take a more critical look at the role of housing in their communities. In addition to addressing discrimination, the AFFH rule also requires cities and counties to look at access to community resources and opportunities, things like good schools, good jobs, low-cost transit, grocery stores, healthcare facilities, and a clean environment. Under this framework, HUD grantees need to consider whether everyone has equal access to neighborhoods with these types of opportunities, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or any other protected class. The AFFH rule also requires HUD grantees to take meaningful actions to overcome patterns of segregation and create communities that are inclusive for everyone. Grantees must work to reduce affordable housing needs and barriers that limit people's ability to access opportunities and resources in their communities. While the Trump administration rescinded the AFFH rule, it was reinstated again in 2021 under President Biden, and is now the approach all HUD grantees must take to evaluate fair housing. As Nancy mentioned earlier, in 2018, the state of California also adopted its own affirmatively furthering fair housing law, which requires all cities and counties to assess fair housing as part of their housing element. So under both the federal and state laws, an assessment of fair housing is needed to outline how cities and counties plan to affirmatively further fair housing. So we'll talk a bit now about what these studies look like. The assessment of fair housing is an analysis of the fair housing landscape in the city of Los Angeles and a plan for how to expand fair housing through 2028. Under the federal AFFH rule, all HUD grantees are required to complete a fair housing study every 5 years, demonstrating how they will affirmatively further fair housing, including actionable strategies for improving housing access and reducing barriers to opportunity. The AFH will include a variety of components. We'll be looking at demographics and patterns related to residential segregation, integration, and income. The study will identify areas of the city with high levels of racial segregation, including those with high levels of poverty and affluence. We'll look at access to opportunities like schools, jobs, transit, and a clean environment, and whether people in all neighborhoods have fair access to these types of resources. We'll consider housing costs and whether affordable housing need varies by protected class. We'll also look at what types of assisted housing are available, things like public housing, tax credit developments, and others, and where they're located. The AFH will include a focus on disability that assesses whether people with all types of disabilities are able to find suitable housing with access to community resources and opportunities. And finally, the study will include an overview of fair housing resources and activities provided by the city, housing authority, and other partner agencies. Community input, including the input that we get from you tonight, will help inform all aspects of the study. The City of LA recently prepared an assessment of fair housing for its 2021 to 2029 housing element that illustrates some of the things that will be in this AFH. For example, the city analyzed how residential segregation and integration intersects with access to resources. Their analysis looked at neighborhoods with high or highest levels of economic, education, and environmental opportunity factors. Findings showed that all of mostly white neighborhoods in LA fall within this category of having ample resources. For diverse neighborhoods, areas where there was a relatively even mix of racial and ethnic groups, about 1/2 have high or highest level resource levels. But none of the mostly Latinx neighborhoods have high levels of resources. So we can see from this information that Latinx, Black, and Asian residents in LA have significantly less access to high opportunity neighborhoods compared with white residents in the city. So the AFH underway now will continue to explore this topic. Another example analysis from the city's recent housing element is related to housing affordability. The chart shown here is looking at what share of renters spend more than 1/2 of their income on housing, which we refer to as having a severe cost burden. About 37% of Black and 33% of Latinx renters spend more than 1/2 of their income on housing, compared to about 28% for white renters and 26% for Asian renters. So we can see that the ability to afford housing varies by race and ethnicity in LA, which is another fair housing issue that the AFH now underway will explore. Based on all the research, data collection, previous studies, and community input, the assessment of fair housing will identify fair housing issues in the city. For each issue, we'll outline the most significant causes or contributing factors. Then, with input from the community and other stakeholders, the plan will develop a series of goals and strategies. The strategies need to be meaningful steps toward reducing fair housing issues. The resulting plan will show specific metrics that the city and HACLA plan to achieve, each with a timeline and a responsible party. And every year, HUD will ask the city to report what achievements it has made towards meeting its fair housing goals using these metrics. In addition to meeting state and federal requirements, the AFH will be very important as local leaders make decisions about housing policies and resources. The AFH will be built on community input gathered throughout development of the plan, and is one way residents can voice their opinions to city and HACLA leadership. The study will advance past fair housing efforts, including the city's housing element and its previous assessment of fair housing prepared in 2018. Ultimately, what will come out of the plan is an action-oriented strategy that can impact the city's decisions about how to spend the HUD grants it receives for housing, community development, and homelessness. The strategies will also shape changes to existing projects, programs, or policies by the city or HACLA, or lead to the development of new ones. The final plan will be adopted by the City Council and HACLA leadership, and it represents a commitment by the city and HACLA to implement activities that expand fair housing and stop future housing discrimination for all residents. Before we get into our discussion, I'd like to share a few examples of current fair housing efforts underway by the City of LA and its partners. Stay Housed LA helps prevent eviction through outreach to landlords and tenants and legal assistance for renters facing eviction. It's a collaboration between the city, Los Angeles County, and local legal service providers that began during the pandemic. It responds to the need for tenant protection, which was one of the contributing factors identified in the 2018 AFH and the city's housing element. In 2019, the city adopted an ordinance prohibiting housing discrimination based on source of income, which came before the 2020 state law that made discrimination against voucher holders illegal. Passing this ordinance was identified as a key strategy for expanding access to housing and neighborhood opportunity in the city's 2018 AFH. And research has shown that cities that pass laws protecting voucher holders have higher rates of landlord voucher acceptance compared to cities without these protections. However, we know from recent reporting that discrimination against Section 8 voucher holders is still a fair housing need in the city. Another approach designed to improve fair housing for renters is the city's tenant anti-harassment ordinance passed in 2021. The law prohibits landlords from harassing tenants by removing housing services, ignoring needed repairs, refusing to accept rent, or doing other things that interfere with a tenant's ability to enjoy their home in comfort and peace. An anti-tenant harassment ordinance was a strategy outlined in the city's 2018 AFH to respond to displacement pressure and the lack of affordable housing. The housing element identifies outreach and education about the anti-harassment ordinance as a goal, and that outreach is currently underway by the city and its partners. Since the 2018 AFH, the city has also worked to expand access to accessible housing. Its accessible housing program monitors compliance with federal and state requirements and conducts outreach and education about accessibility and fair housing to property managers for rental communities built with city assistance. Additionally, the Accessible Housing Program maintains a searchable registry of affordable accessible units and developments built with City of LA support. In the 2021 housing element, the city identified a goal of providing at least 24 annual fair housing and disability training sessions and continuing to expand the accessible housing registry. So hopefully these examples give you an idea of the type of activities that might come out of the assessment of fair housing, whether it would be continuation or improvement of existing programs or policies, or development of new ones. The AFH process began earlier this year with collecting data and preparing for community engagement. And we're now in the second phase focused on gathering public input. So that includes this meeting and other similar community meetings we'll hold in December, along with a series of stakeholder meetings and focus groups in January. We also have a survey open that we hope everyone will participate in, which we'll have a link to later in the meeting. During the early part of 2023, we'll be drafting the AFH based on the public input and data we collected. In the spring, we'll want to hear from the community again to get feedback on the draft fair housing issues and strategies to address them. By the summer, we anticipate having a complete draft assessment of fair housing for public presentation and a 45-day comment period. And then we'll then make any final revisions to prepare for an August approval by City Council in HACLA. So we'll begin the discussion portion of our meeting shortly, but before that, I'd like to pause and take any questions so far. If you have a question, please use the raise hand feature so our moderator can see you. If you're joining by phone, you can raise your hand with *9 and mute or unmute with *6. And you can also put questions or comments in the chat. If we're not able to get to your question tonight, please leave it in the chat with your email, And someone from the project team will be in touch with you shortly after the meeting. I'll
Let's see.
pause for any questions.
We have a hand raised on the phone. Someone with a phone number ending 751. If you'd like to unmute yourself and speak now.
Thank you. Jamie Francis Wendell. I just wanted to say I missed the listening session last week. I was able to comment. No one reached out to me. Someone said that they would reach out to me. So I just wanted to make a comment later, but I just wanted to ask the question of if people are engaging, because I want to do the West Valley and then I'll probably do the West Side meeting in 2 weeks. But when someone says that someone will reach out to you, we have your number, and not hear from anyone, it gets very frustrating. So I missed the meeting. So luckily I am trying to hear feedback, but I like to reserve. I don't want to hold up the meeting so far, but when someone provides the information, a number, and someone says, yes, we have that, please do your due diligence of reaching out to people like me, because now I have to engage more and be on the lookout, which makes it more difficult.
Sure, thank you for that. I don't know if the city would like to respond.
So sir, your contact information has already been shared with people at the Housing Authority. So they are going to be reaching out to you. So they do have your contact information.
Well, I hope. It's just that, thank you very much. But I wanted to just say that with the Housing Development Department, especially when it used to be in the off of Santa Monica Boulevard, I would like to engage more with HCDI LA when it came to housing opportunities, and I've missed the opportunities for many years because of the ineffectiveness of the Housing Authority, and I'm quite resentful. So to be quite honest, I don't want to really interact with people with LA City Housing, because I've literally done the shaft for 12 years now. I'd rather speak to economic development or people organizing this meeting today, along with HCI, DLA. But I'm very disappointed with the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles in general. I think it's been horrible. I couldn't reach anybody in the Valley, and I've had bad experiences in the Wilshire sector or Wilshire corridor that I haven't been back for the last 9 or 10 years. So I'm just disappointed with how they've operated things, and I've lost 5 opportunities. No thanks to them.
Thank you for joining again tonight and for speaking. And I think the city has your contact information and can route it to the appropriate agency. So
thank you. And I'll make a later public comment when it comes to the specific area of the South Valley in regards to my experiences. But I just want to make that point. So thank you for taking my point for the time being. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't see any hands raised or any questions in the chat.
All right, well, if there are no further questions, we can go ahead and just jump into the part of the meeting where we get to hear from you all. I think we're going to keep it as just a single group. Is that right?
I think that will work with our size.
Okay, great. Okay, so we just went ahead and stopped the presentation so we can more easily see one another and talk about fair housing needs in LA. We'll be recording and taking notes during this discussion, but you can also continue to use the chat function to provide any written comments that you would like to share. So the first question is, where do you live and what do you like about your neighborhood? Do you have access to things like good schools and jobs, quality medical services and grocery stores, convenient transportation, accessible sidewalks and safe parks, to name a few examples. Are there improvements you would like to see? So kind of a few questions combined.
Is there anyone who would like to share anything that you like about your neighborhood? Maybe in the South Valley, if you live in other areas, that's fine too. We just kind of like to get a sense of what people value in their neighborhoods. Anyone who would like to share? I don't see any hands raised. And I believe we had one comment in the chat that from someone who lives in Northridge who values great access to education, grocery stores, and restaurants.
Hey, thank you.
Anyone?
And do you feel like you have access to things like good schools and jobs, kind of amenities that you need every day in your neighborhood, infrastructure like sidewalks? Do you feel like you have access to those types of resources and amenities that you need?
We have, so from the person in Northridge, yes, there's great infrastructure, but the cost of living is high. And then we have another comment that promotion of mixed use would be awesome, bike lanes and transit. And also that accessibility is huge. So the setup in a DTLA where everything is more walkable is amazing.
Okay, great.
Would anyone like to share verbally any ideas? I don't see any hands, Jessica.
Okay. Yeah, feel free to keep adding in the chat or just jump in as well. Any improvements that you would like to see in the South Valley?
We have one hand raised, Farah, am I saying that right?
Yeah, Farah. My neighborhood in Encino was fantastic for neighborhood schools, everything else when I moved in here 25 years ago, apartments. But now that I am older, forced retirement, in a non-rent controlled building, living on Social Security, rent is out of control, and there's nothing in the city that helps seniors, where somehow or other the city or housing should do something about rent control for people on Social Security. And meanwhile, the sidewalks aren't fixed enough for walkers like me. And yes, I do drive, but car insurance is based on the number of miles you drive. And now that I'm not working, I tend to walk more than I drive if I can help it. And so I've fallen a few times because of the condition of the sidewalks. And I mean, I live in a great area for walking. There's Balboa Park. There's the walkway between White Oak and Lindley, where there's a bike path and a walking path. And the people from the city come and clean it up all the time. But then there's the homeless that come out and harass the people that are walking. And the policemen were out there cleaning it up last week. And within 12 hours, the tents were back up. And there's nothing to protect the people that pay their rent. And when your rent goes up 8%, and that amounts to $250 a year increase, there's not enough money for anything else. And I think housing should do something that people who are on a fixed budget of say $1,400 a month, plus what they've saved, the city should maybe do something. And then they have a church that's being pulled down on the corner, and they're putting in a for-pay senior care facility, which is commercial, in a residential neighborhood. And we already have too much traffic, and there's not enough housing. I think housing should go there instead of a commercial property. But they didn't. They sent out the notice for meetings with not enough notice for people to attend. All
Thank
right,
you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. So kind of themes of affordability of housing, accessibility for seniors, addressing homelessness.
And now I'm too old to move.
Thank you so much. I see David has a hand up as well.
Hey, thanks for taking the question and for this meeting. Really appreciate the chance to speak into this. Yeah, I live in near the Barham, Cahuenga, Toluca area, and this is my favorite part of LA. It's been my favorite part of LA for many years, and used to live in downtown, and just didn't feel safe at all. Especially we were there before COVID, and it really seemed like things shifted during the pandemic. So we relocated in 2021, and our area is rent controlled where we live, the majority of it. But actually what we've seen lately, and I don't know if I know you're not the Hockland is not responsible for this, but in asking, hey, what makes a great neighborhood? They're on Forest Lawn. It seems like something may have shifted in an ordinance, or just being able to allow. There's a lot, probably just dozens of RVs and tents that have popped up on Forest Lawn right by Warner Brothers in the area, and it's shifting the landscape of what's going on, and just a little bit of the area. And I know a lot of the other people have expressed concern with it, and we reached out to our senior lead officer for the area from LAPD and different voices. And I know that Karen Bass, one of the top, she's going to create a state of emergency for homelessness on day one. But in asking, what shapes and what a great neighborhood looks like, it's a feeling of safety. And I know that you can't guarantee safety anywhere. But when you see things in the paper and in the news about acts of aggression by the homeless community because of probably some mental health issues, we gotta find an answer. And I'm not sure what that is, but I appreciate you letting me share.
Thank you for sharing that. Would anyone else like to share where you live and what you like about your neighborhood, and improvements you would like to see?
Jessica, we have a comment in the chat from someone who is not a resident, but has worked as a planner in the Southeast Valley, area for several years. And she noted that there is a ton of information on what we've heard from community members on the city's website as well. So we have that link, and we'll take a look there at what other departments in the city have heard about what people like about their neighborhoods.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Also, a comment in the chat from someone that lives in Sherman Oaks and loves having access to quality grocery stores, a mall, a library, a nice park, restaurants within walking distance.
Great, thank you. All right. I guess we can go ahead and move on to the next question about fair and affordable housing needs. If you think of anything else about kind of neighborhood improvements and things in that nature, we can discuss that as well, but we'll go ahead and bring in this next question. What are the biggest fair or affordable housing issues in your community? Can you think of any parts of the city that are particularly affected by these issues?
And we have a hand raised on the phone, phone number ending 751.
Thank you very much, Jamie Francis Wendell. I just wanted to say this was the point that I wanted to comment. As a Section 8 recipient for the last 15 years, 12 particularly in the county of Los Angeles, I had difficulty with the city of Los Angeles. Just the outreach of trying to reach with caseworkers or case management, it's very difficult. And just to refer to a person who is a senior who elaborated on Encino, I'm going to also take that opportunity as a non-senior disabled to show case what has happened to me. You are on an indefinite housing wait list when it comes to the individual properties. They do not have to, by requirement, say when their list opens. I luckily got on a list a few years ago when they closed it abruptly in the Woodland Hills area. I missed one opportunity because that was open in 2018, closed immediately after within 1 month because of a surge in applications. Then coronavirus happened in 2020, or this was 2018, 2019. Under construction, they were saying you had to find articles, newspaper, periodicals, what have you, maybe have your notes to the internet to see specifically or be in the neighborhood. When you are on the west side, just trying to move to the West Valley or find things out from Encino to Woodland Hills to West Hills, it is very difficult to find an affordable unit now when the average rents are close to $2,500 to $2,600 with a housing choice voucher, now approximately $1,926 or roughly thereof or within $30. Same thing now with county that was lower. The city did not make any efforts to enforce housing policies and Section 8 not being declined. Now what happens is people are trying to turn it into a race issue or economic divisiveness issue. When it comes down to people who are in Section 8, regardless of race, your income dictates it. We cannot move where we want to. Well, whoever wants to live wherever, that's their choice. It's called a housing choice voucher. But I am greatly disappointed that as a non-senior disabled who has been disabled the last 20 years and on record and for the last 14 years by the federal government. When I moved to California, I had no access to agencies. I had no access to housing. My housing application almost fell through the cracks because HUD said housing authorities aren't being responsive. Only to have, attitude, and then finally LACTA, which was at that time HACLA, finally ported my voucher. But I just had no confidence in the city of LA. And now I do it on my own to go in person. And now you have these complexes saying to me, point blank, we want $2,500, no exception. We do not want the payment standard. We want more than the payment standard. And I say to them, I cannot pay the difference. And they say, well, then you're not going to rent here. And these are nice units in Woodland Hills, some in Encino, some in Tarzana, but it's out of reach now. And now because of everything that's happened with the turmoil, now it's like, well, what about families in disparity? And what about those that want upper mobility? We all want upper mobility. We all do. But please understand the fact of non-senior disabled, or like this woman said before, who is a senior, who's in a unit that I don't know if is or is not in rent control, and now she can't afford to remain there because Social Security. Well, guess what? There are non-senior disabled who are also on Social Security, including me. And here I am with a chronic disability, and I'm white Caucasian, and I've been disabled since 27 years old. And that's not going to change. It's only going to get worse. And we should not be pitted against each other. We are in our own predicaments, but we also want upper mobility, and it's challenging. And we cannot be competing to get on housing lists or to basically say this unit's only reserved for someone who is of needs or this or family or someone who is homeless, formerly homeless. I mean, now people are cutting the line or basically saying you have preferential treatment. Do not do that because it forces resentments on those of us who have been trying. And it's impossible to move to Woodland Hills now. It really is with the rents are skyrocketing. But I too would like access to nice buildings. I'll never have access without someone saying you don't have enough or no make enough. So when you get $1,000 in Social Security, it doesn't cut it. And that's it. And I'm only disclosing this. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak to this question? The biggest fair or affordable housing issues in your community? Parts of the city you think are particularly affected by fair housing issues? Some examples, maybe things like difficulty finding accessible housing, discrimination against people who were formerly incarcerated, large families not being able to secure an apartment, like we're talking about lack of being able to use housing choice vouchers and things like that. So any, go ahead, Melissa.
I was going to read a couple things from the chat.
Oh yeah, great, thank you.
Someone agreeing with the statement that there's not enough affordable housing or housing for people who are homeless in Sherman Oaks. And another person commenting similarly that we're not building enough affordable or housing for people who are homeless. And then also a comment from the community planner who commented earlier that anecdotally, they are hearing lots of cash for keys deals happening in North Hollywood and Van Nuys. And that all of the shelters that are being built are in industrial zones, so not in residential areas.
Hey, thank you all for sharing all of that.
Is there anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak yet that would like to share any thoughts about housing, affordable housing need or fair housing needs? Don't see any hands up.
Well, feel free to continue adding comments to the chat, or if you think of anything, feel free to let us know as well. The next question is focused on housing discrimination. So are you aware of any housing discrimination that happens in your neighborhood or in the city of LA? What does it look like? What could the city or housing authority do to address or reduce discrimination? What does housing discrimination look like? What are there anything you can think of the city or housing authority should be doing to address or reduce discrimination?
We have one comment in the chat from someone who hasn't seen discrimination, but knows that folks are being priced out of certain areas. Let's see, I think let's see. Efren, Antoinette, Courtney, we haven't heard. Oh, let's see, we have a hand up, Marco.
Hi, thanks for selecting. So on my day capacity, I'm not here on that behalf, but I work at LA Family Housing. And one of the things we've definitely seen is landlords will try to find ways, you know, like obviously upon application being submitted, whatever the case, they're not necessarily, you know, saying no or discriminating, but once they see a client in person, a potential tenant in person or anything like that, they try to draw on different things. And so one of the things that they always are quick to jump to is credit history. And obviously, you know, people of color and lower income folks largely have bad credit due to, money management and education and lack of it. So that's one of the things they'll target as we attempt to pay with third-party payments. They'll also say that they can't take it, although we know it's illegal for them to not accept third-party payments. For a lot of housing choice vouchers and stuff, we still have landlords saying, no, we can't take it, and so on. And if we tell them it's illegal, you have to, whatever the case, they just find another reason. So it's really hard. And I think just aggregating data at the city end of like landlords that have potentially declined, like having something like, have you been potentially wrongfully discriminated against, even if you all don't have legit reasons, right? But at least you could see, oh, Marco Santana has continuously declined, potential Black tenants or potential Latino tenants or so on. That way you can aggregate that data. It would be pretty cool. But yeah, they typically will find a workaround. Folks obviously know the law. So.
Great, thank you. That's such a good point.
If I can add, we have heard as far as that being an issue, in terms of landlords trying or being able to find a loophole, so to speak, which is the issue in regards to there needs to be more enforcement, and we understand that even with the city passing its policy that prohibits discrimination of subsidy payments from not just Section 8 voucher holders, but other third party as well. We knew as far as that would be the difficult part of actually implementing that policy is the enforcement of it. So hoping that this is something that will become stronger in terms of being able to address the issue, because it is still happening where there are denials by landlords. And we're seeing that, we're reading about it, we know. And so definitely it is something that has to be strengthened.
Anyone else? Didi or Alina, I don't believe we've heard from you, or Efren, Antoinette. Anybody that hasn't had a chance to talk yet that would like to? Or if you've already shared and have more you'd like to share. Okay, Jessica, I don't see any hands up. And
Okay.
Nothing in the chat, yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, feel free to, if you think of anything else on housing discrimination, feel free to add it in the chat as well. So we'll move to the next question on fair housing activities. Do you know how to access fair housing services like education programs and complaint investigation or legal assistance in LA? What types of fair housing services do you know about? Can you think of ways the city or housing authority could improve how they let people know about these services? So what types of fair housing services exist in LA?
We had a comment in the chat from Lauren that the issue is mainly related to enforcement. Maybe a question there then, do you feel like if people felt like they were discriminated against, would they generally know where to make a complaint? Is that information that's pretty common amongst city residents? Another comment, the only thing I would advise is outreach, meeting folks where they already are. So where do people who need these services gather? Are we doing outreach at times where they are available and not working? And that Marco hit the nail on the head, that enforcement is the issue. That as folks are kind of screened out during the housing process, so they're discriminated against from the start. That was a comment from the chat. Any other thoughts or ideas about fair housing activities in the city? Maybe then we know that there are some people here, you came to the meeting and maybe you haven't shared anything yet. Is there something that brought you to this meeting that you were interested in learning about? Maybe you have a question or you wanted to share that we haven't asked a question that relates to your comment yet? Just kind of open the meeting up for any other type of discussion related to fair housing or housing access, neighborhood opportunity. We have a comment from Marco that density needs to be a central theme. So maybe creating more residential density. And also a comment from Julia that planning and Dunn do the most public meetings in the city. So we might be able to partner with them to make sure that this information gets out to residents.
Okay, thank you all for sharing that. Any other comments that maybe don't relate to questions that we've talked about already that you came here to share? Well, we can move on to some additional questions. So we have a question about kind of diversity and segregation. Do you believe your community is diverse and has people of different races, nationalities, gender identity, and income levels? If not, what do you think causes people to live in segregated neighborhoods?
Anyone have any thoughts about kind of diversity within your neighborhood? Do you tend to live in, or does the area you live in tend to be pretty diverse or not as much? How would you characterize it?
Yeah, feel free to jump into the chat as well, if you prefer.
I don't see any hands up. We can jump back to wrap up the presentation. Nancy, unless you have any other topics that you'd like for us to discuss.
No, I don't. But just open it up to give everyone another opportunity to voice any comments that they have, anything they want to share before we close up this this meeting.
Yeah, we had a hand up on the phone. That's 751. Mr. Wendell, are you able to unmute and share your comment?
Yes. Hello, thank you so much. I appreciate, I don't want to be verbose, and I appreciate you giving me this platform. I really do appreciate you doing this. I did want to make a couple of points, and I will be short and concise if I can, that as a recipient, and I'm only speaking for myself, and I hope I am speaking for others, that it has been really detrimental to us. Maybe some are very shy and don't know the words or the exact verbiage to use, and I understand them, and they're just in here listening. But it is hard for us to afford to live and remain in Los Angeles. That is what I will say first and foremost, my experience living here for 12 years. And knowing that I want to just move to more affluent neighborhoods. And in the lower valleys, it is more diverse than, say, the West Side, where I'll talk in the next few weeks, because of the experiences, being turned away or not giving explanation or saying you don't meet the income criteria. And so that's something that there's validity to the concern, that people need to make sure they can come and move into a unit or an apartment without having to wonder, am I going to be here next year? Am I going to be priced out? Am I going to have a way of affording this rent with the increases? That's the point I forgot to mention last time, is they are allowed increases. A lot of these apartments, they start at that one rate, and then within a matter of 2-3 years, I've seen people being priced out of Playa Vista, Woodland Hills, Encino. The elderly woman or the senior woman who made a comment that she was fortunate to live in the same unit for 25 years. People aren't given that, unfortunately, aren't given that access, or won't have that much luck when it comes to that of older populations because of not being a senior. So I just want to make those points that the city has to do a better job and making efforts to look into housing discrimination when it comes to housing vouchers and people trying to move into more affluent neighborhoods who can't because of Social Security, or the rents will keep on increasing. On average, it's anywhere from $2,500 to $3,000. That is a lot of money. You need to have 2 people or 3 people in one household in order to afford that. So I'd like to just make those mentions. So thank you for giving me the platform again, and I appreciate you giving this presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And we appreciate everyone providing their thoughts and ideas about housing and neighborhoods in the city. And your input will truly make the study stronger and communicate to the city and housing authority leaders what priorities and strategies Los Angeles should focus on for the next several years. Over the next couple weeks, we'll be updating the city's AFH website. It's housing.lacity.org/residents/assessment of fair housing. You should see it on the screen as well. To include summaries about what we've heard from you tonight and in other community meetings. So if you'd like to see what your fellow Angelenos share, please check it out. And you can also continue to participate in meetings over the next few weeks. So we encourage you to invite friends, colleagues, or neighbors to join you. You can register for meetings at the city's AFH website or using the QR code you see on your screen now. And the more people that participate in the project, the better. So we hope that you'll help us spread the word about it. You can also take a fair housing survey on the project website. So there's one for the general public and a second survey if you're a representative of an organization engaged in housing or social services. And as I mentioned earlier, to get updates about the project and future opportunities to participate, just please send us an email at lahd.afhpolicy@lacity.org. So we'll add you to the mailing list. You can also drop your name and email address in the chat now as well.
Again, we would like to thank everyone for taking time to join us tonight for our meeting. Your voice and the comments that you've shared verbally and also in chat is helping to make this a stronger and better study that will shape fair housing access in Los Angeles for many years to come. That's the goal. So please take note of the project's website link and email address in the chat box to stay engaged. And we look forward to seeing you again as the work on this project continues to progress forward. Thank you.